Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Tactics Board. Norwich City are back in action tomorrow night. Another quick turnaround as they travel to Ashton Gate to take on Bristol City and try to boost morale after what has been a horrendous run of form. Of course, they had a 2-0 lead against Sheffield Wednesday on Tuesday night, ended up losing that game 3-2, and it just feels like there is a bit of tension creeping in as Norwich's season comes to a close, and it feels like the playoffs are getting further and further away to the point where now they're almost a dream. But they will try to keep them alive with a victory tomorrow evening. And here on Tactics Board, I'm going to take a look at how they're going to attempt to do that. That starts with my predicted 11 and the players I think Johannes Hoff-Torp will choose for the game. Then we're going to take a bit of a look at the hosts, how they set up, how the game might pan out as a result. And then I'm going to come on to Anis Ben Slimane, who is one of very few positives coming out of that game on Tuesday night. But we're going to begin with that starting 11. So without further ado, here it is. So I've gone for George Long in goal, Kellen Fisher at right back, Shane Duffy and Jose Cordoba in the centre of defence, with Callum Doyle at left back, Kenny McLean, Anis Ben Slimane and Jacob Wright in the middle of midfield, with Ante Cianats on the right, Borja Sainz on the left, and Josh Sargent through the middle up front. Now, a couple of changes in there. One of them, again, is in goal. I predicted last week that it would be, or for the last game, that it would be George Long in between the sticks ahead of Vicente Reyes. But, of course, he hadn't quite recovered from concussion at that point. He's now had another 3 days, and the noises from Torp post-match, after that Wednesday loss was that Long would be available for this one. And I think given Vicente Reyes' performance against Sheffield Wednesday, it feels likely that he comes in. Of course, I think we've seen that both probably have an error in them, but Long maybe is just slightly better in terms of his presence in the box, also the more experienced character and someone who probably Torp needs to keep on side in the long term, given the fact that he's obviously only recently signed a 3-year contract. He's expected to be the second choice, or at least somewhere in the pecking order below that first choice for the rest of that time. And when the opportunity arises, it feels likely that at least for now he will be in that team. So I think it will be Long in goal. Then there's a bit of a debate around some of the other players and maybe who could dip out after that shocking second half against Sheffield Wednesday. But I think there were enough signs in the first half, at least for Torp, to see that this is a team who can produce. Obviously, they didn't at all after half-time, and there were some tactical issues in there, as well as the sort of mentality problems that a lot of people have highlighted. But given that first half performance was such a positive one, in an attacking sense, they were so good, they controlled the game. I think although you could almost drop some of those players out as almost a punishment for that performance, that would feel a bit like cutting off your nose to spite your face. And I'm sure Torp will back his team to learn the lessons from that second half. So I don't think there will be drastic surgery to this team, although there may well be a couple of changes given the quick turnaround. One of those I expect will be Josh Sargent coming back into the team, of course rested to allow Emiliano Marcondes to come in and make his first start back from injury. Started in a sort of unfamiliar striking role, but against Sheffield Wednesday's back three, who were probably expecting a bit more of a physical duel, that did help Norwich gain numerical superiority in the middle. Obviously, when Wednesday changed it, they went to a back four, they had more bodies in the middle. That wasn't quite as effective, and the defenders were a bit more used to what Marcondes was going to offer. Numerically, it wasn't such a mismatch with three at the back dealing with basically no number 9 in that position. So it didn't quite have the same effect in that second half. And I expect against a Bristol City team that probably will play a back four, the Marcondes role there wouldn't really work. And obviously, everyone will want Josh Sargent back in the team as quickly as possible. So I expect him to start up front. There's an argument that Marcondes could go into midfield after a decent enough performance against Sheffield Wednesday, but given how much they're sort of managing minutes, I think dropping your best striker onto the bench, your best player, I'd say by far, for that Sheffield Wednesday game, shows how seriously they're taking it at this stage in the season. And I think Marcondes, after a significant number of minutes, having come back from injury, may well be dropped to the bench again. But there are a few options for Torup to choose from. Of course, still some injuries to deal with, and important to say that this is before the press conference, so there could be some more surprises thrown up. But either way, there are enough options to make it an interesting team selection, and that's what it will be when the team news drops at 7 p.m. tomorrow night. As far as the Robins and the threat that they pose, I think everyone knows that since Liam Manning has taken over there, they've been a possession-based side, and that's definitely something they've improved at over their time under him. Of course, they've slowly been making their way up the league, and the style of play improving and the players getting more used to it, I think, has been a big factor in that. They're now very good at controlling the tempo of games, dominating territory, and they've got a squad of players who can do that quite well, quite a technical squad of players. And in many ways, they are quite similar to Norwich. They want to press high when they haven't got the ball. They want to counter press and win it back quickly when they lose it. But one of the ways that they do it quite differently is with the fullbacks, who under Torup have been quite inverted and have helped with dominating the central areas of the pitch, but at Bristol City are very high and wide, almost David Wagner style in how they do that. They attack a lot through the wide areas, and the fullbacks provide the width so that those attacking midfielders and the wingers can come inside and make the runs through the half spaces. They stretch out the defence to try to create more space for them to play through balls and create chances that way. So it's a game in which Norwich will need to be strong defensively in the wide areas. That maybe hasn't been the case as much this season. I think Anis Ben Slimane is quite a good defender, quite physical off the ball, wants to press and is good at it. But when he plays on the right, is deployed in quite a central role. Of course, naturally wants to be a bit more central, so has to do a bit more work to get out wide. And then Borja Sainz, I think he's made improvements defensively, but that's an area of his game that both of his head coaches at Norwich have talked about as something he needs to improve. So a bit of pressure on Norwich in that sense. I think in terms of their fullbacks defensively, they should be fairly well covered, especially with Kellen Fisher, who is good in one-on-one situations and has enough pace to deal with the big spaces you have to out wide. Doyle, maybe if they run directly at him and they create those chances that way, that might be a bit of a problem for him. But if they can get into one-on-one situations and he can get a bit of support, then that's a good situation for him. It's probably one where, actually, although Norwich would like to press high and they'd like to leave space in behind so that that back four can be as high up the pitch as possible, Doyle, you almost feel, will be better if he's got defenders in the box and he's defending in and around that area where pace isn't as much of a factor and there isn't as much ground to cover. So that's an interesting balance that Norwich will have to strike, and it'll be interesting to see how tactically they deal with that. But certainly enough threats from Bristol City and a home team that Norwich will really need to be aware of. Now, I wanted to finish by talking a bit about Anis Ben Slimane, who maybe hasn't been at his best since he signed for the club permanently. He's had to play a bit more of a leadership key role in that midfield, with Kenny McLean out, with Emiliano Marcondes out, Marcelino Nunez with obviously injuries that feel like they never end at times. So he's had to maybe play a slightly more defensive role, but I thought we saw one of his best performances in a Norwich shirt against Sheffield Wednesday, particularly in that first half when he got 2 assists. First with a very clever, instinctive flick from a number 10 position into Sainz for his first goal in a few months. Then when Sainz sort of returned the favour, it looked like Slimane might shoot, but he had the wherewithal and the unselfishness to cut back for Anis Ben Slimane with a tap-in. And those were 2 really, really good moments, but I also thought they came in a game where he was more involved, he was a bit better in possession, he maybe found a bit more space in the areas where he can affect the game. And I think part of that is the fact that he's almost been let off the leash with Kenny McLean back in the team, with Jacob Wright also in midfield and him a slightly more defensive, slightly deeper lying option. That has allowed him to play in that sort of number 10 position. And although he isn't a typical number 10, like maybe an Emi Marcondes or the players who have gone before him in, Emi Buendia, Gabriel Sara, Wes Hoolahan even, James Maddison, he's not really that type of player, but he has got a bit of creativity. He's got an ability to move the ball and control it in tight areas, beat defenders with clever bits of skill, and I thought he got into those areas really well. Maybe that's something he can do a bit more often now that McLean is back and should be playing hopefully until the end of the season. that's an area where I think he can be a bit more involved, where he can get on the ball, where he can make things happen. And that probably feels like the sort of thing that Norwich need at the moment, where they've struggled to break down deep defences. Somebody like Slimane who can find that space, who can occupy those areas and then produce the quality when it's needed, I think is really essential to Norwich if they're going to make the most of this possession-based attacking system. And hopefully those 2 assists will give him the confidence to go on and do that sort of thing again in future. Of course, we'll see the first instance of that tomorrow night at Ashton Gate, and we'll have every kit covered. So go to pinkham.com/subscribe if you haven't already. I'll see you again soon on Tactics Board, where hopefully there's a much more positive feeling than I think there is at the moment after that disastrous result on Tuesday night. So let's hope it's not a replica of that and it's something much better. Thank you for joining me again on Tactics Board, and I will see you very soon.